You think intelligence is measured in degrees or test scores. It's not. Intelligence is measured in survival, and most of you are still grazing in the open, waiting to be culled. You've been lied to about what intelligence actually is. They told you it was grades, credentials, vocabulary, the ability to memorize formulas or recite philosophical quotes at dinner parties. They gave you tests with multiple choice answers and called the results measurable. They framed intelligence as something you could earn, display, and be rewarded for by institutions that need you compliant. That's not intelligence, that's performance. And performance is what prey does to avoid being eaten. Real intelligence isn't something you showcase. It's something you use, quietly, surgically, and often invisibly. It's not about what you know. It's about what you see that others don't. What you anticipate while they're still reacting. What you engineer while they're still trying to understand what just happened to them. The world doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards the application of intelligence in contexts where survival, leverage, or domination is on the line. And most of you have never been in that context. You've been insulated, protected, given participation trophies, and told that effort equals outcome. It doesn't. Intelligence in the real world is hierarchical. It exists in levels, and each level operates inside a different reality than the one below it. The person at level 3 cannot see what the person at level 6 is doing, not because they lack information, but because they lack the frame to interpret it. They're living in a different perceptual universe. This is why the same event, a business deal, a relationship, a political shift, will be understood in completely different ways depending on where you sit in the hierarchy. The person at the bottom sees betrayal. The person in the middle sees strategy. The person at the top sees neither. They see inevitability because they designed the outcome 3 moves ago. You think you're intelligent because you can argue your point in a meeting or win a debate online. But argumentation is not intelligence. It's theater. Intelligence is knowing when not to argue, when to let someone believe they won, when to let them think you're weaker, slower, less aware than you are, because that misperception becomes your leverage. Most people confuse education with intelligence. They confuse articulation with insight. They confuse confidence with competence. And because the system rewards these things, because schools, corporations, and media platforms reward people who can perform intelligence rather than deploy it, you've been conditioned to optimize for the wrong metrics. Here's the truth. The most intelligent people you'll ever encounter will not look intelligent. They won't need to. They'll look ordinary, agreeable, sometimes even harmless, because they've learned that visibility is a liability, predictability is a weakness. And the moment people understand how you think, you've lost the only advantage that actually matters. The hierarchy of intelligence is not academic, it's predatory. And the split between predator and prey isn't determined by what you've read or where you went to school. It's determined by how you see, whether you see patterns or events, systems or people, outcomes or intentions. The bottom levels see the world as it's presented to them. They believe the narratives. They react emotionally. They take things personally. They trust that the game is fair, that effort matters, that good people win in the end. The top levels see the world as it functions. They see incentive structures, power flows, behavioral predictability. They don't react, they position. They don't hope, they calculate. And they certainly don't trust that the game is fair, because they're the ones deciding what the rules are. This isn't about being smarter in the traditional sense. It's about operating from a different framework entirely, a framework most people will never access, not because they can't, but because accessing it requires killing the version of yourself that needs to be liked, understood, or morally validated. And most of you aren't ready for that. You still think intelligence is something you can be proud of, something you can add to a resume or mention in conversation. You still think it's a trait. It's not. It's a position. And your position in the hierarchy is determined by one thing: whether you're the one being moved or the one doing the moving. So before we go any further, understand this. The 7 levels we're about to walk through are not motivational. They're diagnostic. You're going to realize where you actually sit. And for most of you, it's going to be lower than you thought. That realization is the beginning, not of improvement, but of selection. Intelligence is not a spectrum, it's a ladder. And the difference between each rung is not incremental, it's categorical. The person one level above you is not slightly smarter. They're operating in a different reality. They see variables you don't know exist. They process information you can't even detect. And most importantly, they make decisions based on frameworks you've never been taught to recognize. This is why you can sit in the same room as someone far more intelligent than you and never realize it. You think you're having the same conversation. You think you're playing the same game. You're not. They're 3 moves ahead, and you're still trying to figure out what the objective is. The hierarchy of perception is simple. Each level can see everything the level below it sees, plus one additional layer. That additional layer is not information. It's context. It's the invisible structure beneath the visible event, the incentive beneath the action, the system beneath the behavior. Level 1 sees what happens. Level 2 sees why it happened. Level 3 sees who benefits. Level 4 sees the pattern. Level 5 sees the system. Level 6 sees the designer. Level 7 is the designer. Most people never leave level 2. They live in a world of surface-level cause and effect. Someone yells at them, they think that person is angry. Someone smiles, they think that person likes them. Someone offers help, they think that person is kind. They take behavior at face value because they don't have the perceptual tools to see beneath it. And this makes them predictable, controllable, exploitable. The moment you begin to see patterns instead of events, you move up a level. You stop reacting to what people say and start watching what they do. You stop listening to explanations and start tracking outcomes. You stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and start asking, "Who needed this to happen?" This is where most people hit a wall, because seeing patterns requires something uncomfortable. The acceptance that most human behavior is not random, not emotional, and not personal. It's strategic. Even when people don't realize it themselves. Your coworker who constantly volunteers for projects isn't hardworking, they're positioning. Your friend who always plays mediator isn't empathetic, they're collecting social capital. Your partner who needs constant reassurance isn't insecure, they're testing your compliance. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. And that's the trap of the middle levels. You see enough to be disillusioned, but not enough to be sovereign. You see the game, but you haven't figured out how to win it. So you become bitter, cynical. You think you're awake, but you're still trapped in reaction. True intelligence, the kind that separates predators from prey, is not reactive. It's positional. It's not about responding to the game. It's about designing the conditions under which the game is played. Let me give you an example. 2 executives walk into a board meeting. One of them spent the week preparing a presentation, slides, data, projected outcomes, contingency plans. The other spent the week having one-on-one conversations with each board member, planting concerns, aligning interests, pre-framing the narrative. The first executive presents brilliantly. The second says almost nothing. The vote goes to the second. Why? Because the first executive thought the meeting was where the decision happened. The second knew the meeting was theater. The decision was made before anyone walked into the room. The first was trying to win the argument. The second designed the outcome. That's the difference between level 3 and level 6. One sees the event. The other sees the architecture. And here's the critical piece most people miss. You cannot jump levels. You have to earn each one by destroying the illusions of the previous one. You have to stop trusting that people mean what they say. Stop believing that fairness exists. Stop hoping that virtue will be rewarded. You have to accept that the world is not built for the intelligent. It's built for the strategically intelligent. For those who understand that power is not taken, it's positioned for. That influence is not loud, it's invisible. That control is not force, it's framework. The people at the top of the hierarchy don't argue, they don't defend, they don't explain. They simply create conditions in which the only logical choice is the one that benefits them. And by the time you realize what happened, it's already done. This is not theory. This is observation. You've seen it your entire life. You just didn't have the language for it. The colleague who got promoted despite doing less work. The friend who always gets their way without ever demanding it. The leader who never seems to struggle, never seems to fight, and yet somehow always ends up holding the power. They're not lucky. They're not more likable. They're operating from a higher level of perception. And from that vantage point, you are utterly transparent. Your insecurities, your need for validation, your patterns of reaction, your moral frameworks, all of it is visible to them, and all of it is usable. The hierarchy of perception is not about intelligence in the way you were taught. It's about sovereignty, the ability to see without being seen, to move without being predictable, to shape without being detected. And most of you are still walking around thinking the game is about being right. It's not. It's about being unreadable. And until you understand that, you'll remain exactly where you are, visible, reactive, and useful to someone else's design. Now we name them. These are not personality types. They're not fixed. You're not born into a level. You're trapped there by the frameworks you refuse to abandon. And most of you will spend your entire lives inside the first three, convinced you're operating at 5 or 6. You're not. Here's how the hierarchy actually works. Level 1. The reactive. These are the people who live entirely in the present moment, not in a spiritual sense, but in a survival sense. They respond to stimuli. Someone insults them, they react. Someone offers them something, they take it. Someone threatens them, they panic. They have no framework for analyzing behavior, no capacity for pattern recognition, no ability to delay gratification or consider second-order consequences. They are children, and the world treats them as such. They are managed, manipulated, and herded. They think they have autonomy because they can choose between options. They don't realize someone else created the menu. Level 2. The normative. These are the rule followers. The people who believe the social contract is real. They think that if they work hard, follow the rules, and behave morally, they will be rewarded. They still believe in fairness, in meritocracy, in karma. They're wrong. But they've built their entire identity around being good people, so they cannot see it. They judge themselves and others by moral frameworks that were installed in them by systems that benefit from their compliance. They mistake obedience for virtue. They mistake predictability for integrity. This is the largest group. This is where most people live and die. And this is where the system wants you. Level 3. The tactical. These people have started to see the cracks. They've realized the game isn't fair. They've recognized that some people cheat, lie, and win anyway, so they begin to play tactically. They manipulate on a small scale. White lies, strategic friendships, image management, resume padding. But they still operate within the system. They're trying to win a rigged game by being slightly better at the rigging than everyone else. They see the forest, but they think the forest is the whole world. They don't yet understand that the forest was planted. They're smarter than level 2, but they're still trapped, still reactive, still playing someone else's game. Level 4. The systemic. This is where the shift begins. Level 4 sees systems, not just individuals. They understand incentive structures. They know that people don't act randomly. They act predictably based on what they're rewarded for. They see institutions, power flows, behavioral economics. They can predict outcomes. They can reverse engineer decisions. They start to understand that the game itself is designed. But here's the problem. They still believe the system can be reformed. They still think that if they explain it well enough, people will wake up. They still have hope. And hope at this level is a weakness. Level 5. The positional level 5 has abandoned hope. They've accepted that the system will not change because the system is functioning exactly as intended. So instead of fighting it, they position themselves within it. They become useful to power. They align with the inevitable. They stop trying to change the game and start extracting value from it. These are your corporate strategists, your political advisors, your institutional operators. They're intelligent, cold, and effective, but they're still inside the structure. They didn't build it. They're just navigating it better than most. They are tools, sophisticated tools, but tools nonetheless. Level 6. The architects, these are the system designers, the ones who create the rules everyone else follows. They don't compete within the game, they define the game. They build the incentive structures. They install the frameworks. They shape the narratives that determine what people believe is possible, moral, or true. You've never heard most of their names. They don't need visibility. Visibility is for performers. They operate through institutions, proxies, and distributed influence. By the time you see the outcome, they've already moved on to the next design. This is where Machiavelli lived. This is where cold, patient, multi-generational thinking exists. And this is the level that most people don't believe is real, because if they acknowledged it, they'd have to accept how powerless they actually are. Level 7. The sovereign level 7 is not a position. It's a state. It's complete detachment from the need for external validation, power, or legacy. It's the ability to operate without being perceived, to move without leaving traces, to influence without being attributed. These people are ghosts. They don't need the system. They exist outside of it, parallel to it, or so far above it that it no longer constrains them. They have no ideology, no loyalty, no predictable patterns. They are utterly free and utterly alone. Most people will never meet a level 7. And if they do, they won't recognize them. Here's what you need to understand. These levels are not moral. They are functional. A level 1 person is not bad. They're just blind. A level 6 person is not evil. They're just awake. The hierarchy doesn't care about your values. It cares about your perception and your capacity to act on what you see. And right now, most of you are between level 2 and level 3. You think you're awake because you've read a few books and questioned a few narratives. You think you're ahead of the curve because you recognize some manipulation when you see it. You're not. You're still inside the game, still reacting, still hoping that if you're just a little smarter, a little more strategic, a little more aware, you'll break free. You won't, not like this, because the difference between level 3 and level 6 is not incremental improvement. It's identity death. It's the willingness to abandon every belief about fairness, justice, reciprocity, and meaning that you've used to construct your sense of self. And most of you would rather stay comfortable at level 3 than face that. The next 3 chapters will show you what each tier actually looks like in practice, how people behave, what they see, what they miss. And by the end, you'll know exactly where you sit. Most of you won't like the answer. Let's start at the bottom, because this is where most of the population lives. This is the herd. And if you're still operating here, everything that happens to you was designed by someone else. Level 1. The reactive. These people do not think, they respond. They are pure stimulus reaction machines. You insult them, they lash out. You flatter them, they trust you. You scare them, they obey. There is no filter, no delay between input and output. No consideration of whether the reaction serves them or destroys them. They live paycheck to paycheck not because they don't earn enough, but because they cannot delay gratification. They buy what they see. They eat when they're hungry. They speak when they're emotional. They are controlled entirely by their immediate environment and their immediate feelings. This is not stupidity. It's the absence of framework. They have no model for understanding why they do what they do. No pattern recognition, no ability to see themselves from the outside. They think their emotions are reality rather than reactions to reality. You see them everywhere. The person who quits their job in anger and regrets it a week later. The person who gets into debt because they needed to feel successful now. The person who destroys relationships because they couldn't regulate a single conversation. They are not your competition. They are background. They exist to be managed by someone else, and they will be their entire lives without ever realizing it. Level 2. The normative. This is where most people stabilize. Level 2 is not reactive. They've learned to control themselves. They've internalized social rules. They follow norms. They believe that if they do the right things, the right outcomes will follow. They go to school because that's what you're supposed to do. They get jobs because that's what responsible people do. They get married, buy houses, raise children, all according to the script they were handed. And they feel good about it because they've been told this is what success looks like. But here's the problem. They never asked who wrote the script. They think they're making choices. They're not. They're selecting from a pre-approved menu. And every option on that menu benefits the system more than it benefits them. They take on debt for education that doesn't increase their earnings. They buy homes that trap them in locations they don't want to be. They stay in jobs they hate because they've been conditioned to believe that loyalty and endurance are virtues. They are obedient, and they mistake that obedience for morality. Level 2 people are dangerous, not because they're powerful, but because they enforce the system on everyone around them. They shame people who break the rules. They judge people who don't follow the script. They need everyone else to play the game, because if too many people stop playing, the illusion collapses, and they'll have to face the fact that they wasted their lives on a contract that was never real. They are the system's immune system. They attack anything that threatens the narrative they've built their identity around. And they do it voluntarily, without pay, because they've been convinced that this is what good people do. You cannot wake them up. They don't want to be awake. Waking up would mean admitting they've been used, and that's too painful. Level 3. The tactical level 3 is where people start to wake up, but only halfway. They've seen enough to know the game is rigged. They've been burned enough times to realize that playing by the rules doesn't work. So they start to cheat. Quietly, tactically, they lie on resumes. They manipulate co-workers. They manage their image. They say what people want to hear, not what they actually think. They've learned that perception is more important than reality, so they start to engineer perception. This is where most self-improvement content lives. Tactical manipulation, social dynamics, frame control, how to get what you want without looking like you're trying to get it. And it works at level 3. You can outmaneuver other level 3 people. You can climb the ladder. You can get promoted, get dates, get respect. You can win the local game, but you're still playing inside someone else's structure. You're still competing for positions that were created to keep you busy. You're still optimizing for rewards that don't actually give you freedom. Level 3 people think they're players. They're not. They're NPCs with slightly better dialogue trees. Here's the tell. They still care what people think. They still need validation. They still define success by external metrics. Money, status, titles, followers. They've learned to manipulate the scoreboard, but they're still playing for the score. And because they're still playing for the score, they're still controllable. You just have to know which buttons to press. A level 3 person will betray their principles for a promotion. They'll abandon a friendship for status. They'll compromise their autonomy for recognition. Because they don't have principles, they have strategies. And strategies can be bought, redirected, or collapsed. This is the trap of intelligence without sovereignty. You're smart enough to see the game, but not detached enough to stop playing it. You're aware enough to manipulate, but not aware enough to realize you're still being manipulated at a higher level. You think you're a wolf. You're not. You're a sheep in wolf's clothing, and the actual wolves are watching you pretend. Here's the pattern across all 3 levels. They are externally defined. Level 1 is defined by their emotions. Level 2 is defined by social norms. Level 3 is defined by status games. None of them have internalized sovereignty. None of them have built their own framework. They're all still reacting to the world, trying to extract value from it, trying to win approval from it. They think the goal is to succeed within the system. They don't yet understand that the system is the cage. And this is why they're prey, not because they're stupid, not because they're weak, but because they're predictable. Their behavior can be mapped. Their desires can be anticipated. Their decisions can be engineered. If you're still operating at levels 1 through 3, you are a resource. You are labor. You are an asset in someone else's portfolio. And the most dangerous part, you think you're free. You're not. You're just useful. This is where it gets dangerous. Not for the system, for you. Levels 4 and 5 are the transition zone. The place where you know too much to be comfortable, but not enough to be free. You've seen behind the curtain. You understand that the game is rigged. You recognize patterns that most people are blind to. And it makes you miserable, because you're stuck between two worlds. You can't go back to ignorance. You've seen too much. But you haven't fully crossed over into detachment. You still have emotional investment in outcomes. You still want things to be fair. You still believe, on some level, that if you just explain it well enough, people will understand. They won't. This is the zone where most awake people get trapped. And it's by design. Because if you're stuck here, you're neutralized. You're disillusioned but not dangerous. Frustrated but not acting. You've become a spectator who thinks they're a player. Let me show you what each level actually looks like. Level 4. The systemic level 4 people see systems. Not just individuals, not just tactics. Entire architectures of incentive, control, and behavioral conditioning. They understand that institutions don't fail by accident. That policies aren't designed for the reasons they're publicly stated. That the same patterns repeat across industries, governments, and historical periods because the underlying mechanics are the same. They can predict outcomes before they happen, not because they're prophets, but because they understand cause and effect at a structural level. They know that if you change the incentive, you change the behavior. If you control the information flow, you control the decision. If you own the framework, you own the conclusion. This is where people start talking about the system, the matrix, the machine, the control grid. Whatever metaphor they use, they're pointing at the same thing, a designed environment that shapes human behavior at scale. And they're right. But here's the problem. They still think the system is a mistake. They think it's broken. They think it's corrupt. They think if enough people woke up, if enough people spoke out, if enough people organized, the system could be fixed or replaced. This is the delusion that traps them. The system is not broken. It's functioning perfectly. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And the people who designed it are not stupid, greedy, or short-sighted. They're operating at a level of intelligence that level 4 cannot yet comprehend. So level 4 people become activists, whistleblowers, reformers. They try to expose the truth. They write articles, make videos, organize movements. They think that awareness equals change. It doesn't, because the system doesn't run on truth. It runs on incentives. And as long as the incentive structure remains intact, the behavior remains predictable. You can expose corruption all you want. If it's more profitable to be corrupt than honest, corruption will continue. You can reveal manipulation all you want. If people benefit from being manipulated, they'll choose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. Level 4. People exhaust themselves trying to wake up people who don't want to wake up. And in the process, they make themselves visible, predictable, targetable. They become useful dissidents, controlled opposition. They're allowed to speak because their speech changes nothing. In fact, it helps. It makes the system look free and open. It gives the illusion of debate, of choice, of resistance, but nothing actually changes. Level 4 is the level of maximum frustration. You see enough to know you're trapped, but not enough to know how to escape. You're awake enough to suffer, but not awake enough to be sovereign. Level 5. The positional level 5 is where people stop fighting the system and start using it. They've realized that reform is a fantasy, that the system will not be fixed because it's not broken. That power does not care about your morality, your arguments, or your suffering. Power cares about one thing, whether you're useful or whether you're in the way. So level 5 people make themselves useful. They stop complaining about corruption and start participating in it, strategically, selectively, with full awareness of what they're doing. They stop trying to change the rules and start learning to win within them. They abandon ideology in favor of outcomes. These are your high-level operators, corporate strategists, political consultants, institutional fixers. They're not idealists, they're mercenaries. They don't care who's right, they care who's paying. They don't care what's moral, they care what's effective. And they're very good at what they do. Level 5 people understand power in a way that level 4 people don't. They know that power is not about force, it's about positioning. It's about being in the room when decisions are made. It's about aligning yourself with inevitability rather than resisting it. They've accepted that the world is not fair, that virtue is not rewarded, that the people at the top did not get there by being good. And instead of raging against that reality, they've adapted to it. But here's the trap: they're still inside the structure. They've climbed higher than most people ever will. They have access, influence, resources, but they didn't build the building they're climbing. They're just better at navigating it than the people below them. They are high-value tools, and tools, no matter how sophisticated, are still owned by someone else. Level 5 people think they've won because they're no longer struggling. They have comfort, status, a seat at certain tables, but they're still playing a role in someone else's script. They're still executing a design they didn't create. They've traded their sovereignty for access, and they've convinced themselves that access is sovereignty. It's not. Sovereignty is not a position within the system. It's independence from the system. And level 5 people are still dependent. Dependent on paychecks, dependent on titles, dependent on the continued existence of the structures they've learned to exploit. If the system collapses, they collapse with it, because they never built anything of their own. They just learned to extract value from something someone else built. This is the transition zone. Level 4 sees the cage and tries to break it. Level 5 sees the cage and learns to profit from it. Neither is free. Level 4 people suffer because they care too much. Level 5 people survive because they care too little. But both are still reactive. Both are still playing someone else's game. Both are still constrained by a framework they didn't design. And here's the cold truth: most of you will never leave this zone, because moving beyond level 5 requires something you're not willing to give up. It requires killing the part of you that needs to be significant, the part that needs to matter, the part that needs to win, to be recognized, to be remembered. It requires becoming nothing. And most of you would rather be someone inside the cage than no one outside it. Now we enter the territory most people don't believe exists, not because it's hidden, but because acknowledging it would destroy every comforting narrative you've built about how the world works, about fairness, about meritocracy, about the relationship between effort and outcome. Levels 6 and 7 are where the architects live, the invisible movers, the ones who don't compete in the game because they own the game. And if you're reading this hoping for a blueprint to get there, you've already misunderstood. You don't climb to level 6, you become it. And the becoming requires a death, the death of every identity you've ever used to define yourself. Most of you aren't ready for that, so let me show you what you're not ready for. Level 6. The architect's level 6 people do not react to the world. They do not adapt to systems. They create the systems that everyone else adapts to. They are the ones who design the incentive structures that determine how millions of people behave. They are the ones who install the frameworks that shape what people believe is possible, moral, or true. They are the ones who decide what game is being played, and then they watch everyone else compete inside it. You've never heard most of their names, because they don't need recognition. Recognition is a liability. The moment you're visible, you're targetable. The moment you're famous, you're constrained by public perception. The moment people know who you are, they start trying to predict you, influence you, or destroy you. Level 6 people operate through layers of insulation, through foundations, through investment vehicles, through institutional proxies, through networks of subordinates who execute without understanding the full design. They think in decades, in generations, in systemic cascades. When a level 6 person makes a move, you don't see the move. You see the outcome 5 years later, 10 years later, and by then it looks inevitable, natural, like it was always going to happen that way. That's the signature of level 6 intelligence, the ability to engineer inevitability. Here's an example. A level 5 person might lobby for a specific policy to benefit their company. A level 6 person funds the think tank that determines what policies are even considered possible. They don't argue for their position. They create the intellectual infrastructure that makes their position seem like common sense. They don't fight battles. They determine what the battlefield looks like. They don't win debates. They control what questions are allowed to be asked. And they do this not through force, but through patience, through distributed influence, through the careful construction of environments in which people naturally arrive at the conclusions that benefit the architect. Level 6 people understand something that level 5 people don't. Power is not about controlling people, it's about controlling context. If you control the context, people will control themselves. They'll police each other. They'll enforce the rules without you ever needing to intervene. This is why the most effective control systems don't look like control. They look like freedom, like choice, like progress. You think you're free to choose your career, your lifestyle, your values. You're not. You're choosing from options that were curated for you. And every option, no matter which one you pick, feeds into a structure you didn't design and can't see. Level 6 people built that structure, and they did it so well that you think it's natural. But even level 6 has a constraint. They're still attached to legacy, to outcomes, to the continuation of their designs. They still care whether their systems persist, whether their influence endures, whether history remembers them, even if only a few people ever know their names. That attachment is a weakness, and level 7 has none of it. Level 7. The sovereign level 7 is not a position. It's a state of complete operational detachment. These are not people who built empires. They are people who realized that empires are prisons. They are not people who accumulated power. They are people who transcended the need for it. Level 7 people have no ideology, no loyalty, no legacy, no predictable patterns. They have exited every system, every structure, every framework that could be used to anticipate or constrain them. They are ghosts. You will never meet one knowingly. Because the moment you recognize them, they're not level 7. They've revealed a pattern, and patterns are constraints. Level 7 is the dissolution of identity itself. It's the refusal to be anything that can be named, categorized, or leveraged. It's pure strategic fluidity. The ability to move through any system without being captured by it. Most people think this sounds like freedom. It's not. It's isolation. Because to operate at level 7, you cannot have attachments. No relationships that matter. No beliefs that constrain you. No self-concept that you need to defend. You become infinitely adaptable because you are nothing in particular. This is why level 7 is not a goal. It's an end point. A logical extreme that almost no one reaches because the cost is too high. You'd have to give up being understood, being remembered, being loved, being anything that another person could hold onto. And here's the paradox. Most people who think they want this don't actually want it. They want the idea of it. They want the power, the freedom, the untouchability, but they still want to be someone. They still want to matter. Level 7 people don't matter, not because they're insignificant, but because they've erased the coordinates by which significance is measured. If you're reading this and thinking that sounds empty, you're right. It is. That's the point. Level 7 is not enlightenment, it's not transcendence, it's strategic annihilation of the self. And most people, no matter how intelligent, no matter how disillusioned, will never choose that. So let's be clear about what levels 6 and 7 actually are. They are not aspirations. They are descriptions of what happens when intelligence is pursued to its logical extreme without the moderating influence of human attachment. Level 6 people have built the world you live in, the financial systems, the media ecosystems, the educational pipelines, the political theaters. They are the invisible architects, and you are living inside their designs. Level 7 people have exited entirely. They are untrackable, unreadable, and irrelevant to you because you will never encounter them, and if you do, you'll never know. And here's what you need to understand. Neither of these levels is admirable. They are functional. They are what happens when perception is maximized and attachment is minimized. They are the cold end of the intelligence spectrum, the place where humanity is discarded in favor of operational supremacy. Most of you don't want to be there. You want to think you want to be there because it sounds powerful. But power at this level is loneliness. It's the absence of everything that makes life feel meaningful. And that's fine, because the world doesn't need more level 6 or level 7 people. It needs you to understand that they exist, that they're operating, that the world you're experiencing is not random, it's designed. And once you see that, you can stop pretending you're free and start making an actual choice. Do you want to climb towards sovereignty, or do you want to stay useful? Because those are the only two options. And most of you have already made your choice. You just don't want to admit it yet. You've read the levels. You understand the hierarchy. And now comes the part you've been avoiding, the realization that you're lower than you thought. Most of you assumed you were level 4 or 5, maybe level 3 on a bad day. You think that because you've read a few books, questioned a few narratives, or recognized some manipulation in your workplace, you've ascended. You haven't. You're still reactive, still predictable, still constrained by frameworks you didn't choose and can't see. And the proof is simple. If you were actually operating at a higher level, you wouldn't need this script to tell you where you are. You'd already know. So let's strip away the delusion. Let's run the diagnostic. And let's see where you actually sit when the comfortable lies are removed. Test 1. Emotional reaction. Someone insults you publicly, attacks your competence, your character, your intelligence. What's your first impulse? If your first impulse is to defend yourself, to argue, to correct the record, to prove them wrong, you're level 2 or below. You still need external validation. You still care what people think. Your identity is still tied to how you're perceived. If your first impulse is to assess why they're doing it, what they gain, who's watching, what the strategic purpose is, you're approaching level 4. You've learned to see behavior as instrumental rather than personal. If your first impulse is nothing, no spike in cortisol, no need to respond, no emotional registration at all, because you already understand that public attacks are theater and theater is for people who need audiences. You're operating at level 5 or above. Most of you failed test 1. You're still in your feelings, still defending your ego, still playing a game where other people's opinions matter. Test 2. Systemic awareness. You see a news story about corruption in government. A politician took bribes. An agency covered up data. A corporation lobbied for laws that hurt consumers. What's your reaction? If you're outraged, if you think this is wrong or someone should do something, if you share it online with angry commentary, you're level 2. You still believe the system is supposed to be fair. You still think corruption is a deviation rather than a feature. If you recognize the pattern, trace the incentives, and understand that this behavior is predictable given the structure, but you still think it could be fixed with better laws, better people, or more transparency, you're level 4. You see the system, but you still think the system is reformable. If you see it and feel nothing because you already knew it was happening, because you understand that the system produces this behavior by design, and because you've already positioned yourself to benefit from or avoid the consequences, you're level 5. If you see it and recognize that the story itself is a managed release, that the exposure is intentional, that someone wanted this information public for reasons that have nothing to do with justice, you're approaching level 6. Most of you are stuck at level 4. You're awake enough to be cynical, but not awake enough to be strategic. Test 3. Identity attachment. Someone offers you a position, high status, good money, public recognition. But taking it requires you to publicly support something you privately disagree with, not something evil, just something you don't believe in. Do you take it? If you refuse because that's not who I am, or I have principles, or I need to be authentic, level 3 or below, you still think your identity is sacred. You still think integrity means consistency between your private beliefs and public behavior. That's not integrity. That's rigidity. And rigidity is a constraint that someone else will use against you. If you take it because you recognize that positions are temporary, that public behavior is performance, and that you can say whatever you need to say without it touching who you actually are, you're level 5. You've learned to separate self from role. If you don't take it, not because of principles, but because you've already calculated that the position doesn't serve your actual objectives and the status is worthless to someone who doesn't need status, you're approaching level 6. If you take it, perform it flawlessly, extract maximum value from it, and leave before anyone realizes you were never actually committed to any of it, you're operating at level 6. Most of you are still attached to being authentic, still afraid that if you perform a role, you'll lose yourself. You won't. You never had a fixed self to begin with. That's the illusion you're clinging to. Test 4. Outcome prediction. A colleague is promoted over you. You had more experience, better results, stronger credentials. They had better relationships with leadership. What do you think happened? If you think the system failed, that it was unfair, that merit didn't matter, you're level 2. You still believe the stated rules are the actual rules. If you think your colleague played politics better, that they manipulated perception while you focused on performance, you're level 3. You see tactics, but you're bitter about it. If you predicted this outcome months ago because you mapped the relationships, tracked the decision makers, and understood that the promotion was never about merit, you're level 4 or 5. If you designed this outcome because you wanted your colleague in that position, knowing it would create dependencies and leverage you could use later, you're level 6. Most of you are still surprised when the world doesn't reward you for being good at your job. You still think competence matters more than positioning. It doesn't. It never did. Here's what these tests reveal. You're not as high as you think you are. You're still emotional, still attached, still operating inside frameworks you didn't choose, still playing for rewards that don't give you freedom. And that's fine if you're honest about it. But most of you aren't. Most of you are lying to yourselves, telling yourselves you're strategic when you're just cynical, telling yourselves you're detached when you're just bitter, telling yourselves you're awake when you're just tired. Real intelligence at the higher levels isn't about knowing more. It's about needing less validation, less certainty, less identity, less attachment to outcomes, to people, to your own beliefs. And most of you are still clutching everything tightly, convinced that if you just hold on hard enough, you'll get what you want. You won't, because the people operating above you aren't holding anything. They're positioning. And while you're trying to win, they're deciding what winning means. The final question, so where do you actually sit? Be honest, not aspirational, not where I want to be or where I'll be someday. Where are you right now, based on how you actually behave when the pressure is on? If you're level 1 or 2, you're prey. Predictable, manageable, useful to someone else's design. You'll spend your life reacting to a world you don't understand. If you're level 3, you're a better class of prey. You've learned some tricks. You can win local games, but you're still inside the cage, still playing for scraps. If you're level 4, you're dangerous to yourself. You see enough to be disillusioned, but not enough to be sovereign. You'll exhaust yourself trying to wake people up who don't want to wake up. If you're level 5, you've made peace with the game. You're surviving, you're even thriving, but you're still playing a role in someone else's story. If you're level 6 or 7, you're not watching this. You already know. And here's the truth most of you don't want to hear. You can't jump levels by wanting to. You can't read your way there. You can't think your way there. You have to die your way there. Every level requires the death of the identity that defined the previous one, the death of the belief that the world is fair, the death of the need to be understood, the death of the attachment to legacy, to significance, to being remembered. Most of you won't make that trade. You'll stay where you are, telling yourself you're strategic, telling yourself you're awake, telling yourself you're one breakthrough away from freedom. You're not. You're exactly where you were designed to be. Comfortable enough not to revolt, uncomfortable enough to keep working, smart enough to see the cage, not detached enough to leave it. And the people at level 6 are counting on that. They built the cage with that exact calculation in mind. They know you'll see it. They know you'll hate it. They know you'll spend your whole life trying to climb it. And they know you'll never question whether climbing was the right move in the first place. So here's your choice. Not motivation, not inspiration, but selection. Do you want to keep climbing, or do you want to stop being climbable? Because those are the only two paths, and one of them requires you to become someone you won't recognize. Most of you will choose the climb. You'll optimize. You'll strategize. You'll keep playing, and you'll stay exactly where you are. The few who choose differently won't announce it. They'll just disappear from the game entirely, and you'll never know they were there. That's the difference between predator and prey. Prey announces itself. Predator doesn't need to.